The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Cassandra Taylor stumbled across the barren Arizona landscape, her swollen feet leaving uneven tracks in the dust. One arm cradled her infant daughter while the other steadied her against the brutal winds that swept across Camp Verde's outskirts. She had been walking for 3 days, banished from the only home she had ever known, with nothing but a small bundle of possessions and her 2-month-old baby, Elizabeth. It was 1883, and the small settlement of Camp Verde, Arizona Territory, had grown from a military outpost to a town with rigid moral codes enforced by powerful men. Among them had been Cassandra's own father, the town's Presbyterian minister, who had cast her out when she refused to give up her child or name the father a traveling salesman who had promised marriage before disappearing forever. "Just a little further, Lizzie," Cassandra whispered to her whimpering child, though she had no idea where they were headed. Her dark hair, once her pride, hung limp around her gaunt face, and her blue calico dress was streaked with dust and sweat. The distant sound of hooves made her heart race. Travelers could mean salvation or danger out here in the wilderness. Instinctively, she moved toward a cluster of boulders, seeking shelter from whoever approached. Isaac Miller rode his paint horse at a steady pace, returning to his small ranch after delivering cattle to Fort Verde. At 30, he had spent most of his adult life as a cowhand, before saving enough to purchase his own modest spread 10 miles outside Camp Verde. The sunset cast long shadows across the trail, and he was eager to reach home before full darkness descended. As he rounded a bend in the trail, his horse suddenly snorted and pulled up short. Isaac's hand moved instinctively to the colt at his hip as he scanned the surroundings. "Who's there?" he called out, his deep voice carrying across the emptiness. "Show yourself." After a moment of silence, he heard the unmistakable cry of an infant. Isaac frowned, perplexed. What would a baby be doing out here, miles from town? "I mean no harm," he called again, softer this time. "If you need help, I can offer it." Cassandra hesitated, clutching Elizabeth tighter to her chest. The man's voice sounded kind enough, but she had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Still, she had little choice. Night was falling, and she had no food, no water, and nowhere to go. Slowly, she emerged from behind the rocks, her chin lifted in defiance despite her desperate situation. "We need no charity, sir. Just passing through." Isaac's eyes widened at the sight of the young woman. She couldn't be much older than 20, holding a tiny baby. Both looked exhausted, the woman's face gaunt with hunger and fatigue. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat and dismounting in one fluid motion, "forgive me, but you look like you could use some assistance. There's nothing for miles around here." He kept his distance, not wanting to frighten her. "I'm Isaac Miller. I have a small ranch nearby." Cassandra swayed slightly on her feet, and Isaac took an involuntary step forward, concerned she might faint. "I'm Cassandra Taylor," she replied, her voice cracking from thirst, "and this is my daughter, Elizabeth." "Miss Taylor," Isaac said gently, "may I ask where you're headed?" Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes despite her determination to remain strong. "I don't know," she admitted. Her voice broke. "They banished me for bearing a child." Isaac's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. He'd heard of such things happening in the more religious settlements, women cast out for perceived moral failings while the men responsible faced no consequences. "Then I'll claim you both," he said without hesitation, surprising even himself with the declaration. "At least for tonight. My ranch isn't much, but there's clean water, food, and a roof." "Why would you help strangers?" Cassandra asked suspiciously, though she couldn't help but notice the kindness in his green eyes. Isaac shrugged, his weather-beaten face softening. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because no one should be alone out here, especially not with a little one." He glanced at the baby, who had quieted somewhat. "May I approach?" Cassandra nodded cautiously, and Isaac stepped forward, leading his horse. "You ride," he said, offering his hand to help her mount. "I'll walk alongside." "I can't take your horse," she protested. "You're not taking it, I'm lending it, and you're in no condition to walk another step." His tone brooked no argument, and Cassandra found herself too exhausted to resist. With Isaac's help, she mounted the horse, settling Elizabeth securely in her arms. Isaac took the reins and began leading them toward his ranch. The journey took almost an hour, during which Cassandra fought to stay awake in the saddle. When they finally arrived at Isaac's property, she could make out the silhouette of a modest cabin with a small barn beside it. A dog barked a welcome, rushing out to greet its master. "That's just Ranger," Isaac assured her as he helped her dismount. "He's all noise, no bite." Cassandra stumbled as her feet hit the ground, and Isaac steadied her with a strong hand. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly stepped away, ashamed of her reaction. She had sworn off men after her experience, focusing solely on her daughter's welfare. Isaac led her inside the cabin, which was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple but sturdy furniture filled the main room. He quickly lit a lamp, illuminating the space with a warm glow. "Sit, please," he urged, gesturing to a rocking chair near the fireplace. "I'll get some water and start a fire. You must be parched." As Isaac bustled about, Cassandra sank gratefully into the chair, rocking gently to soothe Elizabeth, who had begun fussing again. The simple act of sitting in a chair, under a roof, felt like unimaginable luxury after the past 3 days. Isaac returned with a cup of water, which Cassandra drank greedily. He then set about lighting a fire in the hearth and putting a pot of stew to warm. "It's just rabbit stew from yesterday," he explained, "but it's filling." "Thank you," Cassandra whispered, emotion clogging her throat. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." Isaac waved away her thanks. "No repayment necessary." He hesitated, then asked, "If it's not too forward, may I ask what happened?" Camp Verde isn't known for banishing its citizens. Cassandra stiffened, but decided this man deserved honesty after his generosity. "My father is Reverend Taylor at the Presbyterian Church. When I found myself with child and unmarried, he gave me a choice: give up my baby to a childless couple in the congregation or leave town." Her chin lifted defiantly. "I chose my daughter." Isaac nodded, respect evident in his expression. "A brave choice." "Not brave," she corrected. "Necessary." "Elizabeth is all I have now." "And the father?" Isaac asked carefully. "A traveling salesman named Johnson. He promised marriage, then disappeared when I told him about the baby." She laughed bitterly. "A tale as old as time, I suppose." Isaac's hands clenched involuntarily. "Some men don't deserve the name." As the stew warmed, Elizabeth began crying in earnest. Cassandra tried to soothe her, but the baby was hungry and overtired. "When did she last eat?" Isaac asked. Cassandra flushed with embarrassment. "This morning I haven't been producing enough milk since we left. I've had little to eat myself." Without judgment, Isaac moved to a small cupboard and returned with a can of condensed milk. "My neighbor has a baby. She showed me how to mix this with water when her little one visits. It's not perfect, but it might help until you're stronger." Tears sprang to Cassandra's eyes at his matter-of-fact kindness. She watched as Isaac prepared the milk with careful concentration, heating it just enough before transferring it to a small cup. "I don't have a proper bottle," he apologized, "but perhaps a clean cloth dipped in the milk." Together, they fashioned a makeshift feeding system. Elizabeth sucked eagerly at the cloth, her tiny hands grasping at it. Cassandra felt a wave of gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. "Eat," Isaac urged, placing a bowl of stew before her once Elizabeth had settled. "You need your strength." Cassandra ate with restraint at first, then with increasing hunger as her body recognized nourishment. Isaac sat across from her, sipping coffee, his gaze occasionally drifting to the baby in her arms. "I have a small second room," he said as she finished eating. "It's not much, just a bed and a chest of drawers, but you and Elizabeth are welcome to it for as long as you need." Cassandra set down her spoon, studying him. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Miller? You don't know us." Isaac considered the question seriously. "I believe we're put on this earth to help each other, Miss Taylor, and perhaps I know something about being judged unfairly." He rolled up his left sleeve slightly, revealing a jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "I spent a year in prison for a crime I didn't commit. When I got out, nobody would give me work except Old Man Johnson at his ranch. He looked past what others said about me." "What happened?" Cassandra asked softly. "Bar fight in Prescott. A man died and I was holding the knife, but it wasn't mine and I wasn't the one who used it. Didn't matter, I was the outsider, so I took the blame. He smiled without humor. The real culprit confessed on his deathbed a year into my sentence, so they let me go. But the damage was done. Cassandra nodded, understanding blooming between them. We're both outcasts then. I prefer to think of us as people who have seen the truth about others, Isaac replied. Makes it easier to recognize genuine kindness when it appears. That night, as Cassandra lay in the narrow bed with Elizabeth sleeping beside her, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, they were safe. Dawn broke over the Miller Ranch with a spectacular display of pinks and oranges. Cassandra awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sleeping past sunrise, a luxury she hadn't experienced since Elizabeth's birth. For a moment, she panicked, reaching for her baby, only to find Elizabeth wasn't beside her, heart racing. She hurried from the bedroom, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. She found Isaac sitting in the rocking chair by the fireplace, Elizabeth cradled expertly in his arms. He was speaking to the infant in low, soothing tones, and to Cassandra's surprise, her daughter seemed perfectly content. "Good morning," Isaac said, looking up. "Hope you don't mind. She was fussing, and I didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed the rest." Cassandra stared at the tableau they presented her daughter, so small and vulnerable, nestled safely in this stranger's strong arms. It should have alarmed her, but instead it brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you," she managed. She's usually not comfortable with strangers. Isaac smiled down at Elizabeth. "We've come to an understanding, haven't we, little one?" I told her about the ranch, and she seemed interested in the horses. He carefully stood and handed the baby back to Cassandra. "I've got coffee brewing and some biscuits in the oven, nothing fancy." As they ate breakfast, Isaac explained his daily routine tending the cattle, maintaining fences, and working the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. "I've got to check the north pasture fence today," he said. "Had some trouble with coyotes getting at the calves." "You're welcome to stay here and rest." "I can't impose on you indefinitely," Cassandra replied, though the thought of heading back out into the wilderness filled her with dread. "Perhaps you know of someone in need of help. I can cook, clean, so stay," Isaac interrupted. "At least until you're stronger and have a plan. The closest town besides Camp Verde is Jerome, and that's no place for a woman alone with a child. It's a mining town, rough as they come." Cassandra bit her lip, weighing her limited options. "I could help around here," she offered. "Earn my keep while I'm here." Isaac considered this. "If it makes you feel better, yes, but it's not necessary." He stood, clearing their plates. "Truth is, it's nice having someone to talk to besides Ranger and the cattle." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Isaac would rise early to handle the heaviest ranch work, while Cassandra took charge of the cabin, cooking meals and tending to Elizabeth. In the afternoons, she often helped in the garden, with Elizabeth napping in a makeshift cradle Isaac had fashioned from a wooden crate. On the fourth day, Isaac returned from town with supplies and a small wooden cradle. "Traded Johnson some leather work for it," he explained when he saw Cassandra's questioning look. "His youngest just outgrew it." "Mr. Miller, you shouldn't—" "Isaac," he corrected gently. "After sharing meals for 4 days, I think we can use first names." Cassandra flushed but nodded. "Isaac, you shouldn't spend your resources on us. We're already taking advantage of your kindness." "Nonsense," he replied, unloading the rest of his purchases. "The cabin hasn't been this clean since I built it, and your cooking puts mine to shame. Besides," he added with a grin that transformed his usually serious face, "Elizabeth needs somewhere proper to sleep." That evening after dinner, they sat on the small porch watching the sunset. Elizabeth was asleep in her new cradle inside, and a pleasant breeze had cooled the Arizona heat. "May I ask you something personal?" Isaac said suddenly. Cassandra tensed but nodded. "Do you miss your family, your father?" The question struck deep, unleashing a flood of emotions she'd been suppressing. "Yes," she admitted, her voice catching. "Not my father so much. He's always been more devoted to his congregation than to me, especially since my mother died. But my sister, Mary, we were close." "I'm sorry," Isaac said quietly. "Family should stand by you in times of trouble." "What about your family?" Cassandra asked, deflecting attention from her pain. Isaac's expression grew distant. Lost my parents to influenza when I was 16, no siblings. Been on my own ever since, working ranches across the territory until I saved enough for this place. It must be lonely, she observed. Sometimes, he acknowledged, but there's a peace in solitude too. He glanced at her. Or there was until a stubborn woman and her baby arrived. Cassandra laughed, surprising herself. When had she last laughed? Are you saying we disturbed your peace, Mr. Miller? Thoroughly, he confirmed with a smile, and I'm grateful for it. The warmth in his eyes made her look away, suddenly conscious of how improper their situation might appear to others. An unmarried woman living under a bachelor's roof would cause scandal in any town, not just Camp Verde. I should be moving on soon, she said, though the thought filled her with sadness. People will talk. Let them, Isaac replied with unexpected intensity. What others think shouldn't dictate how we live our lives. Easy to say when you're a man, Cassandra countered. For women, especially mothers without husbands, others' opinions determine whether we eat, have shelter, find work. Isaac fell silent, considering her words. You're right, he finally conceded. It's not fair. Life rarely is, she said softly. That night, as Cassandra nursed Elizabeth before bed, she allowed herself to consider what it might be like to stay. Isaac was kind, hardworking, and showed a gentleness with Elizabeth that touched her heart. But she had been fooled by a man's charm before, and the consequences had been life-altering. Still, Isaac was different from Frederick Johnson, the salesman who had swept her off her feet with grand promises before abandoning her. Isaac made no promises at all, only offered what he could in the moment. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Cassandra was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Alarmed, she gathered Elizabeth from her basket and hurried inside. Isaac was already out front, greeting the visitor, a middle-aged woman with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes. Cassandra, Isaac called. Come meet Mrs. Hanson. She's my nearest neighbor about 3 miles west. Reluctantly, Cassandra emerged with Elizabeth in her arms, prepared for judgment or hostility. Instead, Martha Hanson smiled warmly. So this is the young woman and baby you took in. Isaac mentioned you when he came by for the cradle. She approached, her gaze appreciative. And what a beautiful child, may I? Surprised by the woman's friendly manner, Cassandra allowed her to admire Elizabeth. I've brought some things, Mrs. Hanson explained, gesturing to her wagon. A few dresses my daughter left behind when she married and moved to California, some baby clothes my grandchildren have outgrown, and preserves from last season. That's very kind, but I couldn't, Cassandra began. Nonsense, Mrs. Hanson interrupted. They're just gathering dust at my place. Better they get use here. She gave Cassandra an understanding look. Life's hard enough for a young mother without pride getting in the way of practical help. With Isaac's assistance, Mrs. Hanson's gifts were brought inside. The clothing was simple but well made, and far better than Cassandra's travel-worn dress. Thank you, Cassandra said sincerely as the older woman prepared to leave. Your kindness means more than I can express. We women must look out for each other, Mrs. Hanson replied, lowering her voice so Isaac, who was checking her wagon's wheel, couldn't hear. Isaac's a good man, the best kind. Whatever your situation, you're safe with him. Before Cassandra could respond, Mrs. Hanson had climbed onto her wagon seat and taken up the reins. Come visit when you can, she called as she departed. My Albert would love to meet you both. After she had gone, Cassandra turned to Isaac, who was watching her with a peculiar expression. What? She asked self-consciously. Nothing, he said quickly. Just. You smiled when you were talking to her. It suits you. Cassandra felt her cheeks warm. She's very kind. The Hansons are good people, Isaac agreed. They stood by me after I got out of prison when others wouldn't. That afternoon, Cassandra tried on one of Mrs. Hanson's dresses, a simple blue calico that fit her surprisingly well. She had just finished nursing Elizabeth when Isaac returned from mending fences. He stopped short in the doorway, staring at her in the new dress. You look. He began, then cleared his throat. The color suits you. Thank you, she replied, oddly pleased by his reaction. Mrs. Hanson was very generous. She has a good heart, Isaac said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. And good judgment. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away, an unspoken tension filling the small cabin. Cassandra busied herself with settling Elizabeth in her cradle, while Isaac washed up at the basin. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Isaac brought up a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began cautiously. "About what you said regarding moving on." Cassandra's stomach knotted. Was he about to ask her to leave? Had she overstayed her welcome? "There's a homestead about a mile east of here," he continued. "Old man Fletcher died last winter, and his place has been empty since. It's not much, a small cabin and a few acres, but it's shelter, and the land office hasn't reclaimed it yet." "You want me to squat on a dead man's property?" Cassandra asked, surprised. Isaac shook his head. "Not exactly. Fletcher had no family, and he told me once he'd be happy to see his place go to someone who needed it. I could help you file a claim with the land office in Prescott. As a widow, you'd be eligible." Cassandra stiffened. "I'm not a widow." "The land office doesn't need to know that," Isaac said pragmatically. "It would give you and Elizabeth a place of your own, independence." The offer was tempting her own home, a fresh start but also daunting. "I don't know the first thing about running a homestead," she admitted. "I could help," Isaac offered quickly. "Show you what you need to know, and the Hansons would pitch in too, I'm sure." Cassandra studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why would you do all this for us?" Isaac looked down at his plate, seeming to choose his words carefully. "When I was in prison, I promised myself that if I ever got out, I'd try to be like old man Johnson, someone who helps others when they're down, who sees people for who they are, not what others say about them." He met her gaze. "You deserve a chance, Cassandra, both of you do." His sincerity was unmistakable, and Cassandra felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "I'll think about it," she promised. The next day, Isaac took her to see Fletcher's homestead. The cabin was smaller than Isaac's, but sturdy, with a stone chimney and a hand-dug well nearby. The land was mostly uncultivated, but a small garden plot remained, gone to weeds but salvageable. "It needs work," Isaac acknowledged as they stood in the doorway, "but the roof's sound and the walls are solid. Fletcher was a good carpenter." Cassandra tried to imagine herself and Elizabeth living here, building a life from this humble beginning. It seemed both impossible and within reach. "How would I support us?" she asked practically. "Even with land, we need income." "Fletcher kept chickens," Isaac pointed to a small coop behind the cabin. "You could start their eggs to sell or trade, and you mentioned you can sew. There's always need for seamstress work in these parts." He showed her the rest of the property, a small barn suitable for a milk cow or goat, a root cellar dug into a hillside, and about 5 acres of arable land. "It's more than many start with," he observed. Cassandra nodded, mentally calculating what would be needed to make the place habitable. The task seemed overwhelming, yet exhilarating in its possibility. "I'll help with the heavy work," Isaac promised, reading her expression, "getting it ready before winter." "Why are you so invested in helping us settle here?" Cassandra asked directly. "The truth, please." Isaac sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "The truth is, I've grown accustomed to having you and Elizabeth around. I like seeing you at my table, hearing Elizabeth's cries and coos, but I also respect that you need your independence, your own place." He gestured to the homestead. "This seemed like a compromise. You'd have your own home, but we'd still be neighbors." His honesty touched her. "I appreciate that, Isaac, truly." She looked around the property once more. "Let me think about it." On the ride back to Isaac's ranch, with Elizabeth securely wrapped against Cassandra's chest, a comfortable silence settled between them. The Arizona landscape stretched out around them, harsh yet beautiful, much like the life it offered, difficult but with unexpected moments of grace. That evening, as Cassandra prepared dinner, she made her decision. "I'd like to try," she told Isaac as he came in from the barn. "The Fletcher place, I mean, if you're still willing to help." Isaac's face lit up with a smile that warmed her more than it should have. "I am," he assured her. "We can ride to Prescott next week to file the claim. The Hansons can watch Elizabeth if you'd prefer not to make the journey with her." Cassandra shook her head. "She goes where I go." After a moment, she added softly, "Thank you, Isaac, not just for this, but for everything." Most men would have ridden past a woman and baby stranded in the desert. Most men are fools, he replied simply, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. The days that followed were filled with preparations. Isaac and Cassandra rode to the Fletcher homestead each morning, working to clean the cabin and make it habitable. They scrubbed floors, mended broken furniture, and cleared the overgrown garden. Mrs. Hanson visited again, bringing seeds for planting and cuttings from her own garden. Herbs grow well here, she advised Cassandra. Rosemary, thyme, sage, good for cooking and medicine both. In the evenings, they would return to Isaac's ranch, tired but satisfied with their progress. Elizabeth seemed to thrive in the fresh air, growing plumper and more alert each day. A week later, they made the journey to Prescott. The territorial capital was larger and busier than Camp Verde, with brick buildings lining Whiskey Row and the courthouse dominating the town square. Cassandra felt conspicuous with her baby, especially when they entered the land office. The clerk, a balding man with spectacles, eyed them skeptically as Isaac explained their purpose. "A widow, you say?" he asked, peering at Cassandra over his glasses. "Yes," she answered steadily, the lie bitter on her tongue but necessary. "My husband died in a mining accident in Jerome last year." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "Sorry to hear it, madam. These parts are hard on families." He shuffled some papers. "The Fletcher homestead, you said, 10 acres with improvements." Isaac nodded, producing the rough map he'd drawn of the property boundaries. "Filing fee is $10, the clerk said, plus another $5 for the deed registration." Cassandra's heart sank. She had no money, having left Camp Verde with only what she could carry. "Here," Isaac said, placing the coins on the counter before she could speak. "And we'll need a receipt, please." "Isaac, no," Cassandra whispered. "I can't let you. It's an investment in a neighbor's success," he interrupted with a wink. "You can pay me back with eggs when your chickens start laying." The clerk processed their paperwork, had Cassandra sign several documents as Mrs. Cassandra Taylor, and finally handed over a provisional deed. "Full title comes after you've worked the land for 5 years, he explained. "Maintain residency, show improvements each year, and it's yours free and clear." Outside the land office, Cassandra turned to Isaac, overwhelmed by emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned with a smile. "You've got years of hard work ahead." "Homesteading isn't easy, especially alone." "I'm not alone," she replied, looking down at Elizabeth sleeping in her arms. "And apparently I have good neighbors." Isaac's expression softened. "The best," he agreed. They spent the night in a modest hotel in Prescott, Isaac insisting on separate rooms to protect Cassandra's reputation. The next morning, they purchased supplies for the homestead: seeds, tools, and 2 laying hens with a rooster. "A start for your flock," Isaac explained as he secured the crate of poultry to their wagon. "They'll need feed through winter, but by spring they should be mostly self-sufficient if you let them forage during the day." On the journey back to Camp Verde, Cassandra found herself studying Isaac as he drove the wagon. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and firm jaw softened by the beginning of a beard. His hands, large and calloused from years of ranch work, held the reins with gentle competence. There was a steadiness to him that she found increasingly attractive. Catching her gaze, he raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Just thinking," she said quickly, looking away. "About all there is to do at the homestead. One day at a time," he advised. "That's how anything worthwhile gets built." By the time they returned to Isaac's ranch, Cassandra was eager to begin her new life at the Fletcher place. They agreed she would stay 1 more week at Isaac's while they finished the essential repairs to the cabin. On her last night at the ranch, Isaac prepared a special dinner: venison he had hunted the day before, with potatoes from his garden and biscuits Cassandra had baked. "A celebration," he explained, "of new beginnings." After Elizabeth was asleep in her cradle, they sat on the porch with cups of coffee, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Nervous?" Isaac asked. "Terrified," Cassandra admitted with a small laugh. "But excited too. I never imagined I'd have my own land, my own home." "You'll do fine," he assured her. "You're stronger than you know." She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. The warmth in his gaze made her breath catch. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, Why have you never married? The question had been on her mind for weeks. A man like Isaac, kind, hardworking, handsome in his rugged way, should have had women lining up to be his wife. He seemed surprised by the question but considered it seriously. Never met the right woman, I suppose, and after prison, well, it changes how people see you. Most families don't want an ex-convict courting their daughters, even if he was innocent. Their loss, Cassandra said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Isaac's eyes widened slightly, and he set down his coffee cup. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he stood abruptly. It's getting late, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Big day tomorrow, moving you to the homestead. Cassandra nodded, both relieved and disappointed by his retreat. Yes, of course. Good night, Isaac. Good night, Cassandra, he replied, holding the door for her before returning to the porch alone. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for moving. They loaded Isaac's wagon with Cassandra's belongings, the clothes from Mrs. Hanson, Elizabeth's cradle, and the few kitchen items Isaac had insisted she take from his cabin. I've got duplicates, he claimed, though Cassandra suspected otherwise. The Fletcher homestead looked different now after their week of work. The cabin was clean, the garden cleared and partially planted, and the chicken coop repaired and ready for its new occupants. As Isaac carried in the last of her things, Cassandra stood in the center of the main room, Elizabeth in her arms, surveying her new home. It was humble but honest, a place where she could raise her daughter with dignity. What do you think? Isaac asked, setting down the crate of kitchen supplies. It's perfect, she replied sincerely. I can't believe it's really mine. Believe it, he said with a smile. You've earned it. An awkward silence fell between them as they both realized the moment of parting had arrived. Well, Isaac said finally, I should get back, let you settle in. Cassandra nodded, her throat suddenly tight. Yes, of course. He moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the latch. If you need anything at all, I'm just over the ridge, and I'll check on you tomorrow, make sure you're settling in all right. Thank you, she managed, for everything. Isaac hesitated, then stepped back to her. Gently, he touched Elizabeth's soft cheek with one finger. Be good for your mama, little one, he murmured. Then, before Cassandra could react, he leaned down and pressed a quick, gentle kiss to her forehead. Take care of yourself, Cassandra Taylor. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Cassandra stood motionless, the spot where his lips had touched her skin seeming to burn with an unfamiliar warmth. Well, Elizabeth, she whispered to her daughter, it's just us now. But somehow, standing in her own cabin, with land that would soon be legally hers, Cassandra felt less alone than she had in months. The first week at the homestead tested Cassandra's resolve. Simple tasks became complicated with a baby to care for, and she quickly learned the rhythms of rural life, rising before dawn to tend the chickens, hauling water from the well, keeping the cabin warm as autumn's chill deepened. Isaac was true to his word, visiting daily to help with heavier tasks and to check on their well-being. Mrs. Hanson came twice, bringing a basket of eggs and showing Cassandra how to preserve the last of the garden's produce for winter. Pickled beets will keep through till spring, she advised. And dried apples make a fine pie when fresh fruit is scarce. One evening, as Cassandra sat on her small porch watching the sunset, she heard the now familiar sound of Isaac's horse approaching. He appeared around the bend in the trail, his tall figure silhouetted against the crimson sky. Evening, he called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post she had installed. Thought I'd bring you some of that venison stew you liked. Figured you might be tired of eggs and rabbit. Cassandra smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. You thought right, come in. Inside, Elizabeth lay in her cradle, already asleep after a day of fussing with a new tooth coming in. Isaac moved quietly, respecting the baby's rest as he set the covered pot on Cassandra's small stove to warm. How are you settling in? He asked, taking the chair she offered at the small table. Better each day, she replied. The chickens are laying well, and Mrs. Hanson says her son can bring me a milk goat next month if I'd like. Good, Isaac nodded approvingly. A goat's easier to manage than a cow for one person, and they're less fussy about forage. They ate together, the stew as delicious as Cassandra remembered. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering practical matters like preparing for winter and lighthearted topics like the antics of Isaac's dog, Ranger. "He treated a raccoon yesterday," Isaac recounted with a laugh. "Then sat there howling until I came to see what he'd caught. The raccoon just watched him from up in the pine, cool as you please." Cassandra laughed, realizing how much she had missed these evening conversations during her week at the homestead. For all her desire for independence, she had grown accustomed to Isaac's company. "I miss our talks," she admitted as they finished eating. "It gets quiet here after Elizabeth falls asleep." Isaac's expression softened. "My cabin feels empty too." Ranger's a good dog, but his conversation skills are limited. Their eyes met across the table, and Cassandra felt a flutter in her chest that both thrilled and terrified her. She hadn't expected to feel this way again, especially not so soon after Frederick's betrayal. "I should go," Isaac said, breaking the moment. "It's getting late and you look tired." "I am," she admitted, rising to clear their plates. "But thank you for the stew and the company." At the door, Isaac paused. "I was thinking, there's a harvest social in Camp Verde next week. Nothing fancy, just music and dancing at the schoolhouse. Would you consider going with me?" Cassandra stared at him, taken aback by the invitation. "To Camp Verde, where people know me, know my shame." "There's no shame in being a mother," Isaac said firmly. "And anyone who thinks otherwise isn't worth your concern." "My father will be there," she pointed out. "The whole congregation." "Then let them see you happy and well," he countered. "Show them you're thriving despite their judgment." The idea was both terrifying and strangely appealing. To return to Camp Verde not as a disgraced daughter but as a homesteader in her own right, with a good man at her side. "I don't know," she hedged. "What about Elizabeth?" Mrs. Hanson would watch her, I'm sure. "It would just be for a few hours." He smiled encouragingly. "Think about it." Cassandra nodded slowly. "I will." After Isaac had gone, she sat by Elizabeth's cradle, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. The prospect of facing Camp Verde society again was daunting. But there was also a part of her that wanted to show them, especially her father, that she had survived their rejection and found a new life. And there was another reason, one she was reluctant to admit even to herself. She wanted to spend an evening with Isaac, to see if the feelings growing inside her were real or simply gratitude for his help. The next morning, Cassandra rode to the Hanson farm with Elizabeth. Martha welcomed her warmly, ushering her inside where Mr. Hanson sat at the table mending a harness. "Albert, this is Miss Taylor and her little Elizabeth," Martha introduced them. "The ones I told you about staying at the Fletcher place." Albert Hanson, a ruddy-faced man with kind eyes like his wife's, stood politely. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Taylor. Martha speaks highly of you." Cassandra relaxed slightly, sensing no judgment from the older man. "Thank you for welcoming us to the area, Mr. Hanson." "Call me Albert," he insisted. "Any friend of Isaac's is a friend of ours." Over coffee and Martha's applesauce cake, Cassandra broached the subject of the harvest social. "Isaac has invited me," she explained hesitantly, "but I'm concerned about Elizabeth." "Say no more," Martha interrupted with a knowing smile. "We'd be delighted to watch the little angel, wouldn't we, Albert?" Her husband nodded agreement. "Been too long since we had a baby in the house. Our grandchildren in California are growing up without us seeing them enough." "Are you sure?" Cassandra asked. "She can be fussy with strangers." "Babies know who they can trust," Martha said confidently. "And she's always been good with me. You go and enjoy yourself, dear. It'll do you good to have an evening out." Decision made, Cassandra rode back to her homestead with a lighter heart. She would go to the social with Isaac, face the town that had cast her out, and perhaps discover if the feelings growing between them had a future. When Isaac came by that evening, she told him her decision. "I'll go," she said simply. "For myself and for Elizabeth, to show them we're not beaten." The smile that spread across Isaac's face was worth any anxiety she felt. "I'm glad," he said sincerely. "Very glad." The night of the harvest social arrived with clear skies and a full moon illuminating the trail to Camp Verde. Cassandra wore one of Mrs. Hanson's dresses, a deep burgundy calico with modest lace at the collar, which Martha had altered to fit her slimmer frame. Her hair, usually tied back practically, she wore partly down, curling softly around her shoulders. When Isaac arrived to escort her first to the Hansons to drop off Elizabeth, he stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the sincerity in his tone leaving no room for doubt. Cassandra blushed, unused to compliments after months of disgrace and struggle. "Thank you, you clean up rather well yourself." It was true. Isaac had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best denims. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard, revealing more of his strong jawline. After leaving Elizabeth with the Hansons, who cooed over her and shooed the young couple on their way, they rode toward Camp Verde in Isaac's wagon. Cassandra grew quieter as they approached the town, her anxiety mounting. "We don't have to do this," Isaac said gently, noting her tension. "We could turn around, have our own celebration at my place." The offer was tempting, but Cassandra shook her head. "No, I want to go. I need to show them and myself that I'm not ashamed." Isaac reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "I'm proud of you." The schoolhouse was lit with lanterns, their warm glow spilling out into the gathering dusk. The sounds of fiddle music and laughter carried on the evening air. Wagons and horses were tethered outside, indicating a good turnout. Isaac helped Cassandra down from the wagon, offering his arm as they approached the entrance. She took it, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. As they entered, the music continued, but conversations faltered as people recognized Cassandra. Whispers spread rapidly through the room, and many eyes turned their way. Cassandra lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by their stares. Isaac's arm under her hand remained steady, his expression calm but resolute. A few brave souls approached women who had known Cassandra before her disgrace, curious about her reappearance. Cassandra Taylor, Mrs. Wilson, the shopkeeper's wife, said with undisguised surprise. "We heard you'd left town." "I did," Cassandra replied evenly. "I've established a homestead near Mr. Miller's ranch." "A homestead, on your own?" The woman's eyebrows rose skeptically. "The Fletcher place," Isaac interjected smoothly. "She's making a fine go of it, before Mrs. Wilson could respond. Cassandra saw a familiar figure across the room, her father, Reverend Taylor, standing with several members of his congregation. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Cassandra thought she saw a flicker of something recognition. In his gaze before his expression hardened into disapproval. "Excuse me." A soft voice interrupted Cassandra's staring match with her father. She turned to find her younger sister, Mary, standing nervously beside them. "Cassie." "Mary." Cassandra's composure cracked at the sight of her sister, whom she hadn't seen since being cast out. "Oh, Mary, I've missed you." The sisters embraced, heedless of watching eyes. Mary pulled back first, wiping tears from her cheeks. "How are you? How is the baby?" "Father wouldn't let me write to you, but Mrs. Hanson sent word that you were safe." "Elizabeth is wonderful," Cassandra assured her. "Growing stronger every day. She's with the Hansons tonight." She turned slightly. "Mary, this is Isaac Miller. He's been a good friend." Isaac tipped his hat politely. "Miss Taylor." Mary studied him with obvious curiosity. "Thank you for helping my sister, Mr. Miller. We've been so worried." "She's helped herself," Isaac replied with a smile at Cassandra. "I just provided a place to start." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Reverend Taylor, his tall figure imposing in his black suit. "Mary," he said sharply, "your mother needs you." Mary's eyes widened. "Stepmother, father," she corrected gently, "and I'm speaking with my sister." "The music's starting again," the Reverend said, ignoring her correction and Cassandra's presence entirely. "Thomas Wilson is looking for you to claim your dance." With an apologetic glance at Cassandra, Mary nodded. "I'll find you later," she promised, before allowing herself to be led away. Reverend Taylor turned cold eyes to his elder daughter. "You should not have come back to shame this community again." Before Cassandra could respond, Isaac stepped forward slightly. "Your daughter has nothing to be ashamed of, Reverend. She's building an honorable life for herself and her child." "And you are?" the Reverend demanded. "Isaac Miller, I ranch north of town." Recognition flickered in the older man's eyes. "The convict," he said dismissively. "I might have known you'd take up with such company, Cassandra." Isaac's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. I was exonerated, Reverend, as you well know, since the confession was published in the territorial paper. A technicality, Reverend Taylor sniffed. Character shows itself in a man's associations. And my daughter's character is stronger and finer than you give her credit for, Isaac interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised Miss Taylor a dance. Without waiting for a response, Isaac guided Cassandra toward the area cleared for dancing, where other couples were already moving to the lively fiddle tune. You didn't have to defend me, Cassandra said softly as Isaac's hand settled respectfully at her waist for the dance. I know, he replied, leading her into the steps of the reel. I wanted to. As they moved through the dance, Cassandra became aware of the stares and whispers around them. Some were disapproving, but others seemed merely curious or even supportive. Mrs. Hanson's brother, whom Cassandra had met briefly, nodded to her as they passed in the dance, while his wife smiled warmly. By the end of the first dance, Cassandra's initial tension had eased somewhat. When the music slowed for a waltz, Isaac hesitated. Would you like to continue, or would you prefer some punch? Dance with me, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. I remember how to waltz. Isaac's hand at her waist tightened slightly as they moved into the slower, more intimate dance. Cassandra was acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the careful way he guided her around the floor. You dance well for a rancher, she observed, trying to ease the tension between them with humor. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a cattle drive. The mention of his mother, long dead, touched Cassandra. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Isaac agreed softly. She would have liked you. The simple statement carried weight, and Cassandra felt herself blushing again. And my mother would have liked you, she replied. She valued honesty and kindness above all else. As the evening progressed, Cassandra found herself enjoying the social despite the occasional disapproving glance. Mary managed to slip away from their father's watchful eye long enough to arrange a meeting the following day at the general store. I want to meet my niece, she insisted, and hear everything about your new life. By the time Isaac suggested they leave, Cassandra was ready. The emotional strain of facing the town again, combined with the physical exertion of dancing, had left her tired but oddly satisfied. As they drove back toward the Hanson farm to collect Elizabeth, the moon illuminated the landscape with silver light. Cassandra sat close to Isaac on the wagon seat, drawn to his warmth in the cool night air. Thank you, she said after they had traveled in comfortable silence for some time, for giving me the courage to face them again. You already had the courage, Isaac replied. You showed that when you chose Elizabeth over their approval. Cassandra considered this. Perhaps, but it helps to have someone who believes in you. Isaac glanced at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. I do believe in you, Cassandra, more than you know. At the Hanson farm, they found Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in Martha's arms. The older woman had clearly enjoyed her evening with the baby, reluctant to relinquish her even as she handed her carefully to Cassandra. She's a joy, Martha declared. Hardly fussed at all, just wanted her bottle and a few stories. The ride to Cassandra's homestead was quiet, with Elizabeth sleeping against her mother's chest and Isaac guiding the horses with sure hands. When they arrived, he insisted on seeing her safely inside and lighting the lamps before taking his leave. At the door, he hesitated. I enjoyed tonight, he said simply. As did I, Cassandra replied, shifting Elizabeth to her other arm, more than I expected to. Isaac nodded, seeming to struggle with words. Finally, he said, Cassandra, I care for you and for Elizabeth, more than as a neighbor or friend. The declaration, though not entirely unexpected after the events of the evening, still made Cassandra's heart race. Isaac. You don't need to say anything, he added quickly. I know it's soon and you've been through so much, I just wanted you to know. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, then stepped back. Good night, Cassandra. Good night, Isaac, she managed, watching as he returned to his wagon and drove away, the sound of hooves and wheels fading into the night. Inside, as she settled Elizabeth in her cradle, Cassandra touched her cheek where Isaac's lips had been. The warmth there seemed to spread through her entire being, a sensation both frightening and exhilarating. The next morning, Cassandra woke to find a basket on her porch containing fresh eggs, a loaf of bread, and a small bunch of wildflowers. No note accompanied the gift, but none was needed. Isaac's message was clear. Later that day, she kept her promise to meet Mary at the general store in Camp Verde. Her sister was already waiting when Cassandra arrived with Elizabeth, having ridden the Hansons' gentle mare they had insisted she borrow. Mary's face lit up at the sight of her niece. "Oh, Cassie, she's beautiful. May I hold her?" Cassandra passed Elizabeth to her aunt, watching as Mary cooed and fussed over the baby, who regarded this new person with solemn curiosity. "She has your eyes," Mary observed, "but her hair is darker." "Like her father's," Cassandra acknowledged, then quickly changed the subject. "How are things at home?" Mary's expression clouded. "The same. Father is stricter than ever since you left." Sarah, she referred to their stepmother, who had married Reverend Taylor 3 years after their mother's death, tries to soften his edges, but you know how he is. "I'm sorry I left you there," Cassandra said softly, "but I couldn't give up Elizabeth." "No one expects you to," Mary assured her. "Well, no one reasonable," she bounced Elizabeth gently. "Tell me about your homestead and about Mr. Miller." "There's talk all over town about you two at the social." Cassandra felt her cheeks warm. "Isaac has been kind to us. When he found us on the trail, Elizabeth and I were in a desperate state. He took us in, helped me claim the Fletcher homestead, and clearly cares for you," Mary finished with a knowing smile. "I saw how he looked at you last night, Cassie, like you hung the moon and stars." "It's complicated," Cassandra hedged, though her heart quickened at her sister's observation. "After Frederick, I'm wary of trusting again." Mary's expression grew serious. "Isaac Miller is nothing like Frederick Johnson. Everyone knows Isaac is a man of his word." She lowered her voice. "Even Father respects him, though he'd never admit it." When Isaac was exonerated, Father was one of the first to publicly acknowledge the injustice. This surprised Cassandra. "Then why did he call him the convict last night?" "Because Isaac was defending you," Mary explained simply. "Father can't stand being challenged, especially about family matters." Their conversation continued as they walked along Camp Verde's main street, Mary still carrying Elizabeth, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Several townspeople nodded to them, their curiosity about the reunited sisters and the baby evident but generally not hostile. As they passed the church where their father preached, Mary paused. "I wish things were different," she said softly. "That he could see what a wonderful mother you are, how strong you've been." Cassandra followed her gaze to the white clapboard building with its modest steeple. Once, it had been the center of her world, a place of comfort and community. Now it represented judgment and rejection. "Perhaps someday," she replied, though she had little hope. Reverend Taylor's convictions were as unyielding as the Arizona mountains. Before they parted, Mary pressed a small package into Cassandra's hands. "Mother's locket," she explained. "I've kept it hidden since you left. It should be yours, to give to Elizabeth someday." Tears filled Cassandra's eyes as she recognized the simple gold locket their mother had worn every day until her death from fever when Cassandra was 14 and Mary just 10. "Mary, I can't take this. You must," her sister insisted. "Mother would want you to have it." She embraced Cassandra fiercely. "I'll visit soon. The Hansons have invited me to Sunday dinner next week, and Father can hardly object to me visiting such a respectable family." The sisters' parting was emotional but hopeful, with promises to maintain their reconnection despite Reverend Taylor's disapproval. As autumn deepened toward winter, Cassandra settled into a routine at her homestead. Isaac remained a constant presence, visiting almost daily to help with heavier tasks and often staying for supper. Sometimes he brought game he had hunted or produced from his garden. Other times he simply brought himself, his calm presence becoming increasingly essential to Cassandra's contentment. Elizabeth thrived, growing from a fragile infant to a robust baby who was beginning to sit up and reach for objects. She seemed especially fond of Isaac, often giving him her widest smiles and most enthusiastic coos. "She has good taste, Mrs. Hansen observed during one of her visits, watching as Isaac lifted Elizabeth high above his head, eliciting delighted giggles. Knows a good man when she sees one. Cassandra could only nod, her own feelings for Isaac having deepened into something she was finally ready to acknowledge, if not yet declare. The first snow of winter arrived in early December, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Isaac rode through the storm to check on Cassandra and Elizabeth, arriving with snow crusting his hat and shoulders. "You shouldn't have risked it," Cassandra scolded as she ushered him inside, where a fire blazed in the hearth and Elizabeth played on a quilt nearby. "Couldn't not know you were safe," he replied simply, stomping snow from his boots. Storm came in faster than expected. Cassandra took his coat and hung it near the fire to dry. "Well, you're here now, and it looks like you'll be staying until it passes. I'll make coffee." The domesticity of the scene, Isaac warming himself by the fire while Cassandra moved about her kitchen, Elizabeth babbling happily at the sight of her favorite visitor, struck them both at the same moment. Their eyes met across the room, a current of understanding passing between them. "This feels right," Isaac said quietly, "being here with you both." Cassandra nodded, words failing her as emotion welled up. Instead of speaking, she crossed the room and, in a moment of courage, placed her hand over his where it rested on the mantel. Isaac turned his hand to capture hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her slender ones. "Cassandra," he began, his voice rough with feeling, "I've been wanting to ask you something." Her heart pounded as she met his gaze. "Yes. I know it hasn't been that long since we met and you've been through so much, but..." He took a deep breath. "I love you, both of you, and I want to make a life with you if you'll have me." The declaration, though hoped for, still took Cassandra's breath away. "Isaac, are you certain?" "Taking on another man's child, a woman with my history, Elizabeth, is a blessing," he interrupted firmly. "And your history is just that history. It's your future I'm interested in. Our future, if you want it too." Tears filled Cassandra's eyes as the walls around her heart finally crumbled completely. "I do want it," she whispered. "I love you too, Isaac. I have for some time, but I was afraid to trust myself." Isaac's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "Trust me then, I'll never give you cause to regret it." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. The contact was tender at first, then deeper as Cassandra responded, her arms sliding around his neck. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Elizabeth let out a happy shriek as if approving their union. They laughed, the joy of the moment too perfect for words. "I'd like to marry you before Christmas," Isaac said, his arms still around Cassandra's waist, "if that's not too soon." "Not too soon," she assured him, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. "But who would perform the ceremony? My father certainly won't." "Judge Patterson in Prescott," Isaac suggested. "He's a fair man and he handled my exoneration, or the minister in Jerome if you prefer a church wedding." Cassandra considered this. "I'd like Mary to be there and the Hansens. Then we'll arrange it," Isaac promised. "Whatever you want, wherever you want. I just want to make you my wife and Elizabeth my daughter in every way that matters." The snowstorm kept Isaac at the homestead for 2 days, during which they planned their future together. They would live at Isaac's ranch, which was larger and better established, but keep the Fletcher place as a potential legacy for Elizabeth or any future children they might have. "I'd like more," Isaac admitted as they lay by the fire on the second night, Elizabeth asleep in her cradle. "Children of our own, brothers and sisters for Elizabeth." The thought warmed Cassandra as much as the fire. "I'd like that too," she said softly. "A family, our family." When the snow finally stopped, Isaac reluctantly prepared to return to his ranch. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised as they stood on the porch, the winter landscape glittering around them. "And I'll speak to the Hansens about the wedding." Cassandra nodded, reluctant to see him go but understanding the practicalities of their situation at least until they were properly married. "Be careful," she urged as he mounted his horse. "The trails will still be treacherous." "Always," he assured her with a smile that made her heart skip. "I have too much to live for now." True to his word, Isaac returned the next day with news that the Hansens were delighted about their engagement, and had offered their home for the wedding if the weather made travel to Prescott impossible. "Martha is already planning the dinner," he reported with amusement. "And Albert says he'll fetch Mary from town himself. Reverend's objections be damned." 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold December day, Cassandra Taylor became Cassandra Miller in a small ceremony at the Hanson farm. Judge Patterson had ridden from Prescott, staying overnight with the Hansons to perform the ceremony. Mary stood as Cassandra's attendant, while Albert Hanson stood up for Isaac. Elizabeth, resplendent in a white dress Martha had sewn for the occasion, was held by Mrs. Hanson, who wiped away tears throughout the brief service. "Do you, Cassandra Elizabeth Taylor, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the judge asked, his voice formal but kind. "I do," Cassandra replied, her voice clear and certain as she gazed up at Isaac, whose green eyes never left hers. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was a promise of all the days to come of love, family, and the home they would build together. The wedding dinner was a joyous affair, with neighbors from surrounding homesteads joining the celebration. Even a few townspeople from Camp Verde attended, including the shopkeeper and his wife, who had softened their stance on Cassandra after seeing her with Isaac. Reverend Taylor did not attend, despite Mary's invitation. His absence was a small shadow on an otherwise perfect day, but Cassandra found she could accept it with a peace she hadn't expected. Her family was here: Isaac, Elizabeth, Mary, the Hansons, and the community that had embraced them. That evening, as they rode to Isaac's ranch, now their ranch, with Elizabeth sleeping between them in the wagon, Cassandra felt a contentment she had never known before. "Happy?" Isaac asked softly, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Completely," she assured him, squeezing his fingers. "I never imagined, that day you found us on the trail, that life could be this good again. It's only the beginning," he promised. "The best is yet to come." And as they approached the lights of their home, Cassandra believed him with all her heart. Spring came early to Arizona Territory in 1884, turning the landscape green and filling the air with the scent of wildflowers. On the Miller Ranch, life had settled into a rhythm of contentment and purpose. Cassandra, now 6 months pregnant with their first child together, watched from the porch as Isaac played with Elizabeth, now a toddler with dark curls and an adventurous spirit. The little girl shrieked with laughter as her father lifted her onto his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair for balance. "Not too high," Cassandra called, though she trusted Isaac implicitly with their daughter, for Elizabeth was his now in every way that mattered, officially adopted through papers filed in Prescott the month after their wedding. "She's fine," Isaac assured her, trotting carefully toward the porch with Elizabeth giggling above him. "Aren't you, Princess?" "Hi," Elizabeth declared, one of her growing vocabulary of words. At 18 months, she was talking more each day, filling their home with her cheerful babble. Cassandra smiled, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. The pregnancy had been easier than her first, surrounded as she was by love and support, instead of shame and secrecy. As Isaac set Elizabeth down on the porch, the little girl immediately toddled to her mother, patting Cassandra's stomach with curious hands. "Baby," she announced solemnly, having been prepared for months for the arrival of her sibling. "That's right, sweetheart," Cassandra confirmed, smoothing Elizabeth's unruly curls. "Your brother or sister is in there, growing strong." Isaac sat beside them on the porch swing, his arm going around Cassandra's shoulders as he pulled his family close. "My girls," he said contentedly. And soon, another little Miller to love. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Mary was visiting for the weekend, having finally stood up to their father and moved out of the parsonage to take a position teaching at the Camp Verde school. She stayed with the Hansons during the week, but spent most weekends at the Miller Ranch, delighting in her role as aunt to Elizabeth, and soon to the new baby. "Aunt Mary," Elizabeth cried, wiggling down from the swing and running to the edge of the porch as the wagon came into view. But it wasn't Mary's usual hired buggy that approached. Instead, it was a more formal black carriage, driven by a man Cassandra recognized instantly despite the months since she had seen him, her father. Isaac felt her tense and squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. Cassandra took a deep breath, steadying herself. No, it's all right. I'm curious what brings him here after all this time. They watched as Reverend Taylor drew the carriage to a halt before their home. He sat motionless for a moment, then slowly descended, looking older and more careworn than Cassandra remembered. Behind him, to her surprise, sat Mary and their stepmother, Sarah. Cassandra, Reverend Taylor said formally, removing his hat as he approached the porch. Mr. Miller. Reverend, Isaac acknowledged with a nod, his tone neutral but not hostile. This is unexpected. Yes, I imagine it is. The older man's gaze moved to Elizabeth, who was watching him curiously from behind Isaac's leg. And this must be your granddaughter, Cassandra supplied, her voice steadier than she felt. Elizabeth Mary Miller. Something flickered in Reverend Taylor's eyes at the sound of his granddaughter's full name, which included both his daughters. She's grown. Children do, Cassandra replied, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. It's been over a year since you saw her as a newborn, and even then, only briefly. Mary and Sarah had descended from the carriage and now stood behind Reverend Taylor, Mary's expression apologetic, Sarah's nervous but determined. Perhaps, the Reverend said stiffly, we might speak inside. Isaac looked to Cassandra, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Of course, please come in. Inside the ranch house, which had been expanded over the winter to include another bedroom for the coming baby, Cassandra offered coffee while Isaac settled Elizabeth with her wooden blocks in the corner of the main room. Once they were all seated, an awkward silence fell, broken finally by Sarah Taylor. What your father means to say, Cassandra, she began, earning a sharp look from her husband, is that we've come to make amends. Reverend Taylor cleared his throat. Sarah speaks prematurely, he said, though without real rebuke, but not inaccurately. He looked directly at Cassandra for the first time. Your sister has been persistent in her belief that I acted wrongly in sending you away. Mary smiled faintly at this understatement. She had, in fact, waged a quiet but determined campaign within the Taylor household since reconnecting with Cassandra, gradually bringing their stepmother to her side. And recent events have caused me to reconsider certain positions, the Reverend continued. Mrs. Wilson's daughter found herself in a similar situation this spring. Cassandra nodded, having heard through Mary about Jenny Wilson's predicament pregnant by a soldier from Fort Verde who had been transferred before they could marry. The congregation expected me to counsel the Wilsons to send Jenny away, as I had done with you, Reverend Taylor explained. But I found I could not after seeing the grief it caused in our family, the division. He glanced at Mary, then back to Cassandra. Instead, I performed a hasty marriage before the young man's departure, with his promise to send for Jenny when he's established. That was kind of you, Cassandra said carefully, uncertain where this was leading. It was right, her father corrected, as I now believe I was wrong about you. The admission clearly cost him, his hands clasping tightly in his lap. Pride is a sin, Cassandra, one I have been guilty of. Beside her, Isaac remained silent but supportive, his presence giving her strength to hear words she had never expected to receive. I would like, Reverend Taylor continued with effort, to know my granddaughter. And his gaze dropped to Cassandra's pregnant belly, her sibling when the time comes. Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes, emotions she had thought long resolved surging to the surface. I never wanted to lose my family, she said softly, but I couldn't abandon Elizabeth. I know that now, her father acknowledged, your courage in choosing her over security and reputation. It shames me that I could not see it before. Sarah reached over to take her husband's hand, her support evident. We're asking for a chance, she said to Cassandra, to be part of your lives again if you'll allow it. Cassandra looked to Isaac, who nodded slightly, his expression conveying that he would support whatever decision she made. Then her gaze moved to Elizabeth, playing contentedly in the corner, unaware of the momentous conversation taking place. Elizabeth should know her grandfather, she said finally, and her aunt and step-grandmother. Family is too precious to waste. Relief flooded Reverend Taylor's austere features, and for the first time in Cassandra's memory, she saw tears in her father's eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. The reunion was not without its awkward moments, but by the time the Taylors prepared to leave several hours later, a tentative peace had been established. Elizabeth, initially shy with these new people, had warmed to Mary immediately and eventually allowed her grandfather to lift her onto his knee, where she solemnly showed him her favorite wooden horse. "She has your mother's eyes," Reverend Taylor observed quietly to Cassandra as the little girl slid down to return to her toys. "I should have seen that from the beginning." At the door, as they said their goodbyes, Reverend Taylor cleared his throat once more. "I would be honored," he said formally, "if you would allow me to perform a blessing for your new child when it arrives. Not a baptism necessarily unless you wish it, but a grandfather's blessing." Cassandra looked to Isaac, who nodded his agreement. "We would like that," she told her father. "Very much." As the Taylor carriage disappeared down the road, Isaac put his arm around Cassandra's waist, drawing her close against his side. "You're a remarkable woman, Cassandra Miller," he said softly, "to forgive so generously." "Life's too short for grudges," she replied, leaning into his strength. "And our children deserve to know all of their family." She placed her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. "This little one especially, since they'll never know their other grandfather." Isaac nodded, understanding her reference to her first child's absent father. "They'll have everything they need," he promised. "Love, security, acceptance, everything a child deserves." That night, as they lay in bed together, Cassandra nestled against Isaac's side, his hand gently stroking her rounded belly. "I never imagined that day on the trail," she murmured sleepily, "where your simple act of kindness would lead us." Isaac pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I knew," he admitted. "Not the details, perhaps, but I knew you were meant to be part of my life from the moment I saw you standing there, holding Elizabeth, so brave and determined despite everything." Cassandra smiled at the memory, seeing it now through his eyes. "When I cried that they had banished me for bearing a child, and you said you'd claim us both." "I meant it then," Isaac said softly, "and I mean it now. You and Elizabeth and this little one and any others who might come along your mind to love and protect always." "And you are ours," Cassandra replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "Our cowboy, our salvation, our home." In July of 1884, Cassandra gave birth to a healthy son they named James Albert Miller, honoring both Isaac's father and Albert Hanson, whose friendship had been so crucial to their happiness. Reverend Taylor performed the blessing he had promised, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on his grandson's dark head. The Miller family thrived on their ranch, eventually adding 2 more children daughters, Sarah and Rachel, to complete their family. Elizabeth grew into a beautiful, confident young woman who never doubted her place in her father's heart, though she knew the truth of her birth. The Fletcher homestead was kept in the family, eventually becoming Elizabeth's when she married the son of a neighboring rancher at the age of 20. And so the circle completed itself, a new family beginning where Cassandra's independent journey had started. Years later, when Elizabeth was expecting her first child, she found her mother sitting on the porch of the original Miller ranch house, watching the sunset. "What are you thinking about, Mother?" she asked, lowering herself carefully beside Cassandra. Cassandra smiled, taking her daughter's hand. "About journeys," she replied. "How the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. "Like when grandfather banished you and father found you on the trail." "Exactly like that," Cassandra agreed. "What seemed like the end of everything was really just the beginning." She squeezed Elizabeth's hand. "Remember that when your own child comes, darling. Every ending holds the seed of a new beginning." "I will," Elizabeth promised, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder as they watched the Arizona sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in the same crimson and gold that had illuminated the start of their family's journey so many years before.